Jeff Beck was one of the most daring guitarists to ever walk a stage, a musician who could wring an orchestra's worth of sound out of just 6 strings. But his brilliance came with an edge. Beck was a perfectionist to the bone, someone who had little patience for what he saw as compromise, pretense, or musical shortcuts. In his own words, "Most players give you what you expect. I play what's necessary, even if nobody gets it yet." That uncompromising mindset set him apart, and often against, other big names in rock. For Beck, music wasn't supposed to chase radio hits or rely on gimmicks. It was meant to break barriers and stir the soul. Today, we're counting down 6 bands who ended up in Jeff Beck's crosshairs, exposing his sharpest criticisms and the fierce ideals that guided his entire career. Number 6. Boston. Jeff Beck's dislike for Boston wasn't personal. It was philosophical. When their self-titled 1976 debut exploded onto the radio, filled with shimmering layers of guitars and pristine harmonies, the world hailed it as a breakthrough. Beck, however, heard something very different. To him, it was a beautiful illusion, studio polish covering up a lack of real grit. The mastermind behind Boston, Tom Scholz, was a trained engineer at MIT, and he meticulously built the band's sound in his basement studio. Every guitar line was overdubbed, every harmony stacked until it shimmered like glass. Listeners thought they were hearing a new golden age of guitar rock. Beck thought they were being fooled. "This is what happens when engineering becomes more important than playing," he reportedly told a producer friend after hearing the record for the first time. "They've created a perfect studio sculpture, but try putting it on a stage and it crumbles." Ikan, for Beck, authenticity meant standing on stage with a guitar and an amp, delivering something raw and unpredictable. Boston, by contrast, relied on layer after layer of controlled precision, which Beck saw as technological crutches. Where he sought innovation through touch, dynamics, and fearless improvisation, Boston's success came from splicing together dozens of takes until perfection was manufactured. The contrast only sharpened as critics began comparing the two. Both were celebrated for their guitar innovation, but Beck bristled at the association. At one industry event, he flat-out refused to sit on a panel discussion alongside Scholz, later muttering, "I don't debate with engineers who think knobs and overdubs make you an artist." What frustrated Beck most wasn't Boston's popularity. It was what their popularity represented. A public more in love with gloss than danger. A generation that would rather hear flawless studio perfection than a guitar pushed to the brink in real time. To Beck, Boston wasn't just another band. They were a warning sign that technology and commercial polish were beginning to overtake the human touch that once defined rock and roll. Number 5. Foreigner. When it came to Foreigner, Jeff Beck's contempt ran deeper than just disliking their songs. It was about what the band represented. Their 1977 self-titled debut was an instant smash, powered by slick production, catchy hooks, and arena-ready choruses. To millions, it sounded like British rock perfectly packaged for the American mainstream. To Beck, it sounded like betrayal. Beck reportedly scoffed, "Mick's taken everything dangerous about rock music and sanded off the edges until it's safe for the suburbs." To him, Foreigner wasn't about inspiration or risk. It was assembly line rock, crafted not in smoky jam sessions but in boardrooms where radio executives dictated what would sell. Beck prided himself on never repeating himself, on searching for new ways to stretch the guitar's voice. Foreigner, he felt, had done the opposite, discovered a formula that worked and milked it until it was platinum. What truly disgusted him was the predictability. Every chorus was designed for sing-alongs, every guitar line polished for maximum radio friendliness. According to insiders, Beck once sneered after hearing "Cold as Ice" on tour. "It's not a song, it's a jingle with extra guitars." That cold assessment summed up his philosophy. Music should move people, not sell refrigerators. The tension became sharper when both Beck and Foreigner were dominating American stages around the same time. At one arena show in 1980, witnesses claimed Beck avoided Mick Jones completely backstage, later telling his road crew, "I won't validate someone who's turned rebellion into office work." He saw Foreigner as a band that had abandoned their British heritage of raw, dangerous rock in favor of calculated U.S. market dominance. To Jeff Beck, Foreigner wasn't just another successful act. They were a cautionary tale of what happens when musicians trade instinct for research, when songs are built to please shareholders instead of listeners' souls. Mick Jones may have admired Beck's talent from afar, calling him incredibly gifted but difficult. But Beck never returned the sentiment. In his eyes, Foreigner stood as one of the clearest examples of artistry sacrificed for commercial certainty, and that to him was unforgivable. Number 4. Journey. If Foreigner represented corporate rock in Jeff Beck's eyes, Journey symbolized something even more alarming: the slow invasion of machines into music's soul. By the early 1980s, Journey had conquered the charts with soaring ballads and arena anthems. But what bothered Beck wasn't their success, it was how they achieved it. The turning point for him came with 1981's Escape, an album that cemented Journey as global superstars. To fans, tracks like Don't Stop Believin' and Open Arms were emotional, cathartic sing-alongs. To Beck, they were red flags. He reportedly analyzed the record and muttered, "Neil's a capable player, but he's letting computers steal his spotlight." What he meant was clear. Jonathan Cain's keyboards dominated, leaving Sean's guitar playing as more of an accent than the heartbeat. To Beck, this was a betrayal of rock's foundation. Beck believed the guitar was supposed to be the center of gravity in any rock band. The weapon, the storyteller, the raw nerve that carried emotion from stage to soul. Watching synthesizers creep into the driver's seat infuriated him. According to his longtime tech, Beck once snapped in rehearsal, "They're teaching kids that buttons make music. Next they'll think guitars are just decoration." This wasn't just about Journey's sound. It was about what Beck saw as a dangerous precedent. Bands everywhere began chasing the same slick, keyboard-heavy arrangements, sidelining guitarists in the process. At an equipment expo in 1983, Beck reportedly stormed out of a synthesizer demonstration, later telling a friend, "If you stop believing in your instrument, the instrument stops believing in you." For him, Journey had crossed a line by allowing machines to do what musicians should. And yet, there was irony in the clash. Neil Schon himself admired Beck deeply, once calling him one of the most expressive guitarists alive. But the admiration wasn't mutual. Beck dismissed Journey as a band that sacrificed soul for circuitry, trading the grit of guitar for the easy polish of programmed sounds. To him, they were proof that rock's emotional directness could be swallowed by convenience, and that was unforgivable. Number 3. Yes. If there was one band that perfectly embodied what Jeff Beck despised about overthinking music, it was Yes. While millions of fans celebrated them as progressive rock visionaries, Beck saw them as the opposite of what rock should be: music born from the gut, not from the pages of a textbook. The clash wasn't personal, it was philosophical. Beck respected Steve Howe's technical skill, but scoffed at how the band built their reputation on sprawling compositions and cerebral arrangements. According to colleagues, after attending a Yes concert in the early 1970s, Beck left mid-performance muttering, "They're not playing music, they're solving equations. Where's the blood? Where's the danger?" For Beck, their music lacked the raw instinct that made guitar powerful. It was academic gymnastics dressed as rock. What frustrated him most wasn't their virtuosity, it was how critics celebrated it as the future of music. Beck believed that reducing rock to a showcase of complexity stripped it of its primal energy. He once told Melody Maker in 1973, "Music should come from the gut, not the textbooks. The moment you start writing to impress theory teachers, you've lost touch with real people." That line summed up his entire rejection of Yes. Fans, of course, saw Yes as pioneers of ambition, with albums like Close to the Edge pushing rock into uncharted territories. But Beck saw something different, a band mistaking cleverness for communication. He even mocked their layered time signatures and constant key changes as music for accountants. It wasn't that he doubted their skill, he doubted their purpose. Ironically, Steve Howe spoke respectfully about Beck in interviews, calling him one of the most inspirational guitarists of his generation. But the respect wasn't mutual. To Beck, Yes symbolized a fatal flaw in rock's evolution, when players cared more about theory and precision than instinct and feel. To him, they weren't advancing the guitar, they were draining it of its soul. Number 2. Pink Floyd. When it came to Pink Floyd, Jeff Beck's frustration wasn't about talent. It was about what they chose to do with it. He admired David Gilmour's tone and melodic instincts, but he loathed how the band buried those gifts under layers of atmosphere, concepts, and endless soundscapes. To Beck, it was like watching a master craftsman spend all his time building wallpaper instead of architecture. The resentment began in the mid-1970s as The Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here were celebrated as masterpieces. Critics praised the restraint and the immersive production, but Beck saw it as guitar being reduced to background texture. He once scoffed, "David's got serious chops, but he hides them behind all that atmospheric nonsense. Guitar should lead, not whisper from the corner while machines do the heavy lifting." To him, Floyd's success symbolized a new age where vibe mattered more than virtuosity, where the craft of playing was sacrificed for the illusion of grandeur. What bothered him most was how the public rewarded this shift. While Beck was sweating over every bend and every experiment, Pink Floyd was selling out stadiums with what he called philosophical wallpaper. To Beck, their shows weren't rock concerts. They were theatrical meditations, impressive for spectacle but hollow in terms of musicianship. Great guitarists should be heard, he argued in the mid-70s, not dissolved into conceptual soup. Ironically, Pink Floyd members never showed hostility toward Beck. In fact, Gilmour once praised him as one of the few players who could say more with a single note than most could say with an entire solo. But Beck couldn't return the compliment. He viewed Floyd as the embodiment of wasted potential, musicians capable of brilliance, who instead chose to smother their own talent beneath effects, lights, and ideas. For fans, Floyd's music represented transcendence. For Beck, it represented retreat, a surrender of the guitar's primal force to fog machines, projections, and endless reverb. And that, to him, was unforgivable. Number 1. Led Zeppelin. At the very top of Jeff Beck's blacklist stood Led Zeppelin, the band that, in his eyes, committed the ultimate betrayal. To Beck, Zeppelin wasn't just another group he disliked. They were a living reminder of the career and recognition he felt had been stolen from him. The wound stretched all the way back to 1969, when Zeppelin's debut exploded across the globe, hailed as a revolution in rock. Beck's reaction? Fury. Because to him, the revolution was built on techniques and innovations he had already pioneered during his time in the Yardbirds. Beck often claimed that Jimmy Page, his old bandmate, took his experimental groundwork and packaged it into a more palatable, marketable form. Distortion tricks, feedback control, bowed guitar, things Beck had toyed with in dingy clubs, suddenly became Zeppelin's calling cards. Beck reportedly seethed, "Jimmy built a career on my experimental work and gets credit for inventing what I created." What burned most wasn't Page's success, but how critics and fans treated Zeppelin's sound as if it had sprung from nowhere, ignoring Beck's own contributions to the vocabulary of modern rock guitar. The resentment wasn't helped by their personal history. While Beck struggled through lineup changes, volatile record companies, and a career defined more by cult admiration than massive sales, Zeppelin became the biggest band in the world, selling out arenas and redefining rock stardom. To Beck, it felt like his innovations had been hijacked, mass-produced, and then sold back to the world with someone else's name on the patent. He saw Zeppelin as the corporate juggernaut version of ideas that had once been raw, dangerous, and uncompromising. Yet the feud was never a shouting match in the press. Page stayed diplomatically silent, never throwing insults, never acknowledging Beck's bitterness. That silence only deepened the sting. It left Beck to voice his frustrations alone, often in cutting remarks to journalists or close friends. "They're brilliant performers," he admitted once. "But brilliance built on borrowed blueprints doesn't impress me." Still, there was a complicated undercurrent. Privately, Beck couldn't deny Zeppelin's impact. He admired their power, their reach, even if he resented the credit. And in quieter moments, he admitted he wished his own career had found the same balance of innovation and mass appeal. But pride wouldn't let him say it out loud. Instead, the bitterness lingered. A lifelong reminder that history had crowned someone else with a throne he believed should have been his. In the end, Led Zeppelin wasn't just another band Jeff Beck disliked. They were the ghost that haunted his career. The proof that sometimes the difference between being remembered as a genius and being remembered as a god is timing, branding, and who gets to history first.